Hey, welcome everybody. I give myself a short introduction. My name is Linus Newman. I'm a psychologist and IT security consultant. I am a proud member of the Chaos Computer Club, for which I have given a couple of expert testimonies to the German Parliament on matters of IT security and IT security regulations. And that eventually gave me an interest in political aspects of IT security, which is, as I said, the field that I spend my daytime in. So let's first have a look at what the technical problems are that political solutions, in this case our politicians indeed, want to tackle. So I guess we're all security researchers. What's your reason not to have audited OpenSSL or Bash, right? You didn't think it was an issue, nobody would pay us for it, and it turns out had we done it, we would have probably earned our spot in IT security history books, right? So clearly something was wrong all along for a couple of years here, and I think on this slide there's a specific number here of 25 years. That's how long shell shock was in Bash source code before anybody ever found it, right? So I think that's a number that shows us that something is clearly wrong with this whole approach of open source software that, so cool because everybody can audit it and it, will fix itself and it's secure because it's open source. This assumption was clearly proven wrong for in some interesting cases here. But one more thing that failed was economic incentives for security. So here's just from the long list of companies that were affected by shell shock. Here's just a few that I picked to shame them publicly, right? So this is a random choice here. Basically everybody was affected. And I'm not talking about shell shock because I can't pronounce it. I'm talking about Heartbleed, of course. That's why I also put it on the slide there. So Facebook was affected. They have an annual turnover of 8 billion. Google was affected. They have an annual turnover of 60 billion. Deutsche Bank was affected, annual turnover of 35 billion US dollars here, right? All of these companies should have had a great financial incentive to fix these vulnerabilities, or should they not? I just heard an interesting anecdote of a bank in a small country with about 8 million inhabitants that will be unnamed in this talk. They did not fix the Heartbleed issue immediately because this would mean downtime and this would mean loss of trust by their customers, right? But of course, in this, as soon as Heartbleed, sorry, this is an annoying thing that I carry around. So as soon as Heartbleed was made public, everybody was, of course, asking the bank, what are you going to do about it? And they didn't do anything for the day, right? They said, okay, we wait. And at this point, it was their liability, right? So it was fine. It was absolutely fine that the bank said, we're not going to fix this. We're going to, see what happens. We're not going to make anybody scared, and we'll fix it tonight when we're not annoying our customers anymore. So it was their risk to take, and they won. It was fine. They didn't make bad press, as all the other banks did that went down immediately, right? So I'm not talking about the additional 12 hours that this bank carried the vulnerability. I'm talking about the 2 years that they had it before, right? So and this is where I believe we have a social dilemma. Social dilemmas are basically defined when there's something that is in everybody's interest, but nobody does it because it is in everybody's interest and it incurs costs, right? So why would I finance the audit of the OpenSSL library when everybody else would benefit from it, and they could do it as well, right? Some of them have, much larger annual turnover than I personally do, right? I have to admit that. So everybody is really incentivized to just be a parasite in this area. And this is where I believe, indeed, political approaches are necessary, right? So since we're all technicians, I just give you a brief introduction to politics. So politics is the OSI layer 10, right? This is far up there, right? So just to give you a more more common reference here, right? So they're very high level by nature, and you have to go through all these different layers to finally touch the point where you need to make a change, right? And on the political layer, one thing is very common, and that's the lack of competence. This is not a bad thing. Politicians need to make decisions about all parts of life, and they have, we don't have competence in every part of life, so they don't have it either, right? So if they could fix the buffer overflow, they wouldn't be politicians. So on the other hand, they have this strong pressure to finally do something, right? Something's in the news every day, and politicians need to do something about it, right? They need to prove that they still, everybody's still safe and they can change it. And the solutions that they offer must be visible. So that's where we get all this security theater from, right? At the airport, my goodness, right? So, but it's always the most tempting option for politicians because it's visible. On the lower layer, number 9, we have organizations. This is basically the companies that carry the vulnerabilities, right? They have a chronic lack of resources. They have dysfunctional KPIs, right? So the security officers are basically incentivized not to find too many issues because it's just going to look bad on their annual statistics. And they also have a social dilemma because as long as they have done everything that's in the books, in the minimal baseline security standards, and in security bulletins, and in the service level agreements, they are fine. They are not liable or responsible anymore. And they're covered up to here with that stuff, right? So why would they even bother to look at open source security software that they're using? Everybody's using it, right? Nobody got ever fired for buying IBM. And it's those dysfunctional KPIs that, and this is only a side note, make the security of the organization, the IT security guys, the killjoys of the whole thing, right? They always walk in with this long book and say, well, you need to do this, and your password needs to be so long, and you can't use this phone. And there's already this little change in culture here. This is one of my other interests. I'm just going to mention that here. Then we have the user. Okay, that's a whole different story. We'll skip that. And then we have the application. And this is where vulnerability may be, right? In the end, somebody, be it the coder, has to either not make a mistake or find it and correct it. And let's see if there are any opportunities to actually go through all these different layers and actually work for change there. What I first want to show is how the German government tries to do this. I am a German, so I'm interested in German government and German regulations and German IT security. So I'm taking this as an example. I bet that in your country it's not much different. So German IT security law, which is currently debated and supposed to be passed sometime by the end of this year, beginning of next year, makes changes in 5 different areas, which I'm just going to briefly introduce, right? So we have the BSI, which is basically the body for IT security. It's like they have an office, and from there they make sure that everything is secure. Then we have online services. Those are like service providers like, I don't know. Oh, wait, we don't really have any noticeable online service providers in Germany, but it would be something like Google or Facebook if we had it. Telecommunications, that's of course your mobile and fixed network operators. And then there's exports. Wow, that's where everybody's getting scared, and you are for a good reason. And then there's law enforcement, the guys that some of you work for. So I've created this very complicated slide for the main reason that nobody can say that I did not read and understand the law. And all these slides that are too complicated because they're just supposed to prove that I read the law, I marked with this little symbol up there, right? So those slides you can just ignore and read later and look at me and see what I'm talking about. So in this law, they say, okay, there is something called, or there are things called critical infrastructure, and those are the things that we really want to look at, and we want to make sure that the operators of critical infrastructures work together with the BSI, because the BSI is the office where we make sure that everything is secure. So they had this beautiful idea of saying, okay, why don't we, as the BSI, now tell the operators of critical infrastructure what they are supposed to do and what security measures we want them to implement, right? We actually take a step forward in regulations. We write rules for them. And then they realized, oh man, we actually have no idea how to operate a nuclear power plant, for example. Maybe the operators of such things already know what they're doing. So why don't we just ask them to hand us their minimum baseline security standards so we can then see if they are okay or if we have anything to add. And then we just audit them regularly. Every 2 years we just bug them, and we ask them to report all kinds of stuff to us and all kinds of findings. And then we are the regulatory body of IT security. And they've tried this before. They've tried this for years. And the result was that nobody really wanted to work with them, because they all said, man, I have all these sheets to fill and all these compliance reports to write. I can't just write another one to you. So this is why it's now a law, or will now be a law. And all you get for it, and this is really beautiful, you get a yearly threat level report, right? A yearly report on the threat level. Beautiful. That will help you, to react in an agile manner to threats, right? So now let's imagine, what does it mean for an industry if we're now asking the industry to define a common minimal baseline security standard for themselves, right? Think about, mobile network operators. We have 4 of them in Germany. Think about electricity providers or something like that. You have many more of them. And all of them are competitors, right? So what are those competitors going to do when they meet in their industry bodies, right? They have to meet. So it's not like anybody can propose a minimal baseline security standard. They have to sit together and agree on one that they all agree on, and then suggest it to the German BSI to then use it to force them to comply with it, right? So there's 2 options here. They all sit together. They all have different minimal baseline security standards. They probably first spend several months to consolidate them, to get them, to transform them into a common language, because every company has their own culture. And then eventually they get this comparability between their minimal baseline security standards. Then what are you going to opt for? Option A, which is you just take the rules that all of you comply with, send them to the BSI, and that's the end of the story, right? It's in everybody's interest. Or are you going to add every single good idea in these minimal baseline security standards to create even more work for everybody in the industry to raise the security there, right? I mean, I think you're going to tend towards option A there. But even if you tend to choose option B, and believe me, the industry leaders in security are really looking forward to this, because of course they want to push towards option B, because they want to make sure that their competitors will need to invest into security. And security is considered the sinkhole of money, right? You never get any money back. You throw it into security, you're never going to get it back, right? So some industry players are already looking forward to press this on others and basically eliminate the competitive advantage that they may have by not having as much security. So either way, you have an enormous bureaucratic cost. You have only a little increase in security, and only for the worst of the industry players. And there's absolutely no vision or leadership there, right? This is only bureaucratics. And I don't know, man, this is where the fun in my job ends, right? I like finding vulnerabilities. I like to see them fixed, but I really, really hate the bureaucratics that go along with it. Then there's a beautiful law, or beautiful second law, where they say, okay, let's have online service providers secure now. It's enough. We just write it in the law, they have to be secure. They need to take appropriate organizational and technical measures to protect their systems, components, and processes. You know, all these years they had done it wrong, right? Now finally somebody tells them to do it right. And then there's this beautiful sentence which I liked. They have to use appropriate authentication procedures. That's nice, man. That's really nice. You know, two-factor authentication for everyone, you know, secure standards, you know, maybe they even use HTTPS for their, you know, for their cookies, for their session cookies or something like that. That'd be nice, nice. Turns out this sentence was put in there by law enforcement agencies because they want to be able to identify users. Thanks. That was the one thing that you know, kept the world in an insecure place, that people on Facebook, you know, might hide their identity. And then they are allowed to store usage data for reasons of diagnosis and abuse detection for 6 months. Now, I don't know how many of you work in monitoring and, you know, threat detection. Are you ever interested in logs of, you know, 6 months of age? I personally am not, right? I look at live data, right? I try to look at, you know, the attacks that are going on now. There may be, you know, there's the possible case that I was, you know, infected 4 months ago, and then, you know, I want to go back through attack traces, right? There is a reason there, but I don't need a law for that, really, because this is not about threat detection. This is about law enforcement again. They want to make sure that data is there, and once data is there, they can get it. The title of this slide goes by the famous German saying, wo ein Schwein ist, wo ein Trog ist, da sammeln sich die Schweine. And this was said by Christoph Gusi, who successfully fought the German data retention laws. And this is what this part is all about, this new paragraph 15, sentence 9 of the Telemediengesetz in Germany. They want to make sure that this data is made available to them in case they ask for it. Because basically law enforcement agencies in Germany are allowed to ask for all kinds of data, even if the data was collected for a different purpose. Sorry, I forgot to add this little symbol on that slide. So then there's another part where they say, okay, telcos also need security regulations, and they need to report to a different regulatory body because telcos report to a different regulatory body. We'll skip that. Now let's go to the export regulations. That's a beautiful thing, right? That's what everybody fears, that's, you know, dealing exploits and selling state Trojans. So in this case, they say they want to make sure that their lawful intercept systems are confidential. Of course, confidentiality in lawful intercept is an oxymoron. But we all know that lawful intercept setups are the main entry vectors for other state-level attackers. So I know this is a neutral conference, but it doesn't mean that I'm a neutral speaker. The CCC is, of course, not a big fan of state-sponsored malware attacks on citizens, right? However, we're also not a big fan of paragraph 202A of German criminal law, which outlaws the distribution of attack tools and basically makes pen testing illegal. So when we, as a security group or as a Chaos Computer Club or whoever, publish tools that can be used to attack other users, that's basically a criminal act. As far as I know, nobody's ever gone to jail for that, but this legal gray zone is, of course, nothing that we really need. Now, let's consider the people that have no moral constraints in selling malware to dictators, right? This is what we want to prevent with this law. I don't think they're likely to have any moral constraints to actually found companies in other countries and sell the stuff there, right? We all know that, you know, exporting software is not really a big problem, right? And you cannot really prove where this software was produced, invented, created, or whatever. And this is what we see actors like Gamma doing. They just found companies in different legislations to make sure that they can sell their product without any constraints, right? So in the end, there's a great chance that the people that will suffer from this law are, again, us. People that do research in security, try to publish their results, try to inform the public, try to go through a responsible or full disclosure process to put pressure on vendors to actually fix the vulnerabilities. And then there's another part. They want to make sure that federal law enforcement gains jurisdiction over cybercrime. I mean, I just skipped that as well because it's not really interesting for you anyways. The relevant part here is that the paragraph 202C, which is the hacker paragraph, will remain in the law, and they don't really take the opportunity to get rid of that. So much for the rant, and so much for my take on what German government bodies can do about security. Sorry, can I ask for a glass of water? I think I'm losing my voice. So as I said, I was asked by the Bundestagsausschuss Digitale Agenda, which is like a small group in parliament that were actually trying to think of some good ideas or trying to listen to some good ideas. And I was lucky enough that they asked me to think about what would actually make sense in laws and regulations. Thanks a lot. That would actually increase IT security. So here's what I came up with after talking to a lot of members of the Chaos Computer Club that maybe have some ideas about actual IT software security, and also some ideas about how law and regulations work. So I like to call this the carrot and stick approach to IT security regulation, right? We want to make sure that there are incentives to drive security evolution, and we want to make sure that those who refuse to drive security evolution are punished. And the way you punish people is by taking their money. So, of course, software is where the bugs are, and that's where the bugs need to go, right? So, of course, a very obvious thing is you want regular security audits by independent people, right? That's what most of us earn our money with. You may also get into the business of issuing bug bounties. I'll talk more about this later. And you might consider giving out nice little pieces of liability to vendors that sell security software. I'll talk more about this later. You may also try to push towards secure infrastructures that fend off or mitigate the consequences of security breaches, right? So a smart architecture can actually prevent a security breach from spreading out into a disaster. And then again, we're up there with the government bodies. I had to include chapters like this because, I mean, those are the guys that I was talking to, right? And I had some good ideas for them as well. So the first question I have for you is, will these signs make coders code better and keep attackers from attacking? These are common security certifications issued by the German BSI, the Bundesamt für Sicherheit in der Informationstechnik. So it's my firm belief that nothing illustrates helplessness as well as certifications do, right? In a world where nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, I keep repeating this, they are the sheets of paper that help employees to cover their ass, right? In the end, you only define a bare minimal baseline, and these are basically the symbols of the opposite of proactiveness in security. They cover known vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and that's it, if they do so, right? So there's another presentation I gave last year at CCC about this D-mail concept, where I think I showed that they don't even define state of the art. But let's skip that. So, of course, the most obvious recommendation here is open source software audit should drive security evolution, right? And if you look at the security life cycle, you can prevent the attack from happening, you can detect the attack and stop it from spreading, or you can fail, and then you need to recover, right? And then the whole game starts again. So if we want to take leadership here, we need to make sure that we stay in this first arrow. We want to prevent attacks. We want to find the vulnerabilities that we don't know about yet. And audits, of course, can help find them. So can bug bounties. But you, of course, probably know about some of the big zero-day selling companies in the world. Namely, in this case, I picked Wupen because, I don't know, I just like to blame them for all kinds of stuff. And this was a great opportunity. So they pop calc on a Chrome drive-by exploit, right? Popping calc is just what you do, right? So they introduced this research to the world. This was just a couple of weeks after CanSec West's Pwn2Own contest, right? There was Google's bug bounty program was in place, and basically what Wupen did was present this to the world and say, for security reasons, the exploit code and the technical details underlying the vulnerabilities will not be publicly disclosed. They are available to our customers as part of our vulnerability research services, right? This translates to, look at what we found, man. We can pop calc on Chrome, and we're going to sell this to our state actors, right? We're not even going to help Google get rid of this vulnerability. And the reason they didn't do it is because Google just doesn't offer enough money for a vulnerability like that. I don't know what the Pwn2Own bug bounties were this year, but they're in the, I think in the lower 6-digit or higher 5-digit ranges of US dollars. If you can pop calc on Chrome, chances are you can make a lot more money on the black market selling this to some people that sell it to some other people that you don't even want to have anything to do with. So how can we achieve that a white-hat bug bounty program ever reaches the financial incentives that the black market offers to attackers? And I think if everybody benefits from it, why shouldn't everybody pay their share, right? So we have industry associations. They have a common interest to eliminate these vulnerabilities that they carry, and they have they do big business. They can afford to pay a Windows license for every single of their employees' computers. Why shouldn't they, pay a bug bounty or issue a decent bug bounty on something like OpenSSL that is the core of all their security assumptions? So what I recommended is, let's create a common open source security software fund. Let's have industry funded voluntarily, and if they don't do it voluntarily, we remove the carrot and we pull out the stick and we tell them to fund it. And ta-da, we have industry and we can outbid most states' secret services. And at least we can piss off the Americans, right? So, but what do we do about closed source software here? Well, liabilities are strong economic incentives. I got an email, this is a little anecdote I want to tell you about. I got an email from a vendor yesterday, and this vendor reminded me that we were testing some pens back in May, right? And back in May, we reported something like 50 findings, I think 6 or 7 of them critical. And in this email that I received now in November, 6 months later, the vendor prided themselves that they had now addressed 5 of the vulnerabilities that we had reported, none of them critical. So I said, well, man, it's great that you finally found some time, and it's good, when are you going to fix the remaining ones? And let's look at the critical ones, right? When are you going to fix those? And I say, well, They are on the list for the next software release, which is to be expected at the end of Q1 2015. So by then, it's about 1 year after we told them to fix that stuff. So does anybody want to put their money on the number of vulnerabilities they will have fixed by the end of Q1 2015? They have other stuff to do. Fixing security vulnerabilities is not their primary issue, man. They just don't care. So I would like to change that. Mainly because sorry? Oh, I don't want to tell too much about the vendor or the company that I actually did the audit for, but they were a vendor to the company that had hired us to test the vendor product, right? So the vendor did not even pay for this audit. Interesting point, right? They got it for free, man. So they got a free audit by their customers, and they still don't even give a damn about it. So let's look at the security lifecycle again, right? We want to prevent vulnerabilities. That's where vendor responsibility can play a role. And we want to recover from our vulnerabilities. Of course, we cannot blame the vendor, or nobody's going to sell software anymore if you're going to be responsible and liable for every single O-Day that is hiding in Microsoft Windows, right? It's just not going to be on the market anymore. But of course, you can define reaction times. You can define, if there's a vulnerability, we want you to react to this, right? In a given, in a reasonable time frame. Most big software companies do that already, others don't. So I guess at least for acts of negligence, liability is not too much to ask. Let's get to the second part. So here, again, I'm talking about requirements, security requirements. And I guess what I was already mentioning before, right? Companies want to maximize profit by minimizing cost. And if you look at your org chart and you look at the security group, as I said before, there's always just, this money that they cost. You're never going to see how much money they saved you, right? This is just not in your statistics, right? So of course, if you haven't seen a security breach in 10 years, what does it mean for your budget decisions of the security department? Are you going to say, hey man, for 10 years I haven't seen a single breach, let's give you some more money? Or are you going to say, let's try what happens if we give you half of the money? Because frankly, I don't see that security breaches are any issue here. On the other hand, you have the consumers that can't really assess, verify, understand, or they just don't know. They just buy that stuff and they're happy with what they got. So you have uninformed customers and you have a cost that you can easily reduce. So the result is that security is oftentimes just simply neglected. So here's where I would indeed argue for requirements that you can make or that you can define to make certain security features mandatory. Right? Secure your infrastructure, decentralize it. Apply strong crypto standards, require end-to-end encrypted communications. Those are all things that you rarely see in large organizations. And especially when you talk about infrastructure providers like telecommunications infrastructure providers, they're not going to decentralize anything. They're not going to do anything that costs them more money, has a chance of reducing their performance, and in the end gives them nothing. Nothing they can really advertise to consumers. This is why it took years, for example, that mobile networks reacted when my colleagues actually presented publicly that you can easily crack A51, which is the encryption of mobile phone networks of the second generation. 2 years until A53 was first rolled out in other European mobile network operators. It just wasn't a priority. And I understand how they work, right? It's not that 2 years is actually not even that long for a mobile network operator. They have to test everything, so I don't blame them. I just think, if there were requirements, it may result in them, prioritizing things a bit more. So let's get to the final point that I think is the root cause for all this. And this is the Interior Ministry's inherent conflict of interest. The BSI that I've been talking about all along is basically one of the bodies that the Interior Ministry has. They also have the police force. They also have, the secret services that want to, conduct national surveillance, that want to conduct international surveillance. So the interior secret services in Germany are mainly busy trying to convince us that there's no US cyber espionage, right? The exterior secret services in Germany just last week asked for $4.5 million budget to buy O-Day on the market, right? They want to play with the others. They want to have some 0 days, and they want to, exploit some guys, and, they just thought, let's pour 4.5 million euros into that market there. And all these vulnerabilities that they buy are going to be vulnerabilities that you and I probably hear from in a couple of years when they finally, fixed on our machines. At the same time, their colleagues at the BSI publish intentionally weakened security standards like the DMail standard in Germany because, their boss is never ever going to tell them, hey, you know what, let's roll out nationwide secure end-to-end crypto so we can't intercept our own people anymore. It's just not going to happen, right? And now they are supposed to eliminate the 0 days that their colleagues buy. It's just not going to happen. So what you actually need to do is create an independent regulatory body that can work towards state-of-the-art security and that can actually drive security evolution. And at the same time, and that's the last recommendation that I made to my humble German government, you should start evaluating national security laws that are essentially security breaches. So if you want to do surveillance, fine. Let's try it for a year. And after that year, you show me how that, prevented any threat that I have been exposed to before as a citizen in this country. And this is, by the way, one thing that my good friend Thomas Lohninger, who's sitting right up front, is planning to do in Austria. So I want to advertise that approach. It's the AK Vorrat, who are planning to evaluate those national security laws that were passed in Austria and see if they ever, did what they promised. Because that's the other point in security, and this is actually my favorite joke about the industry, right? There's a man, and he's walking through his garden, and every once in a while, he's just clapping, right? And you ask them, dude, why are you clapping? And he will say, to scare away the pink elephants. And you take a look around. I don't see any pink elephants here. And you say, see? And, this is, I guess, the problem that IT security industry is in at the moment, or that IT security is in. And those were my recommendations that I think can be applied on a political level to work towards a different security culture. And I'm curious for your comments. Thanks a lot.
Comments, questions?
Oh, and before I forget, thanks to Mika and Links for having me at this fine conference. I meant to say that.
So thank you very much. I have 2 comments and a question for you. The first comment is, if you want to feel better about the German laws, you should tuck in one night with the US Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, as well as the wiretap laws. It'll make you feel a lot better, I swear.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And also, when talking about fines and the stick for your carrot and stick analogy, I believe they really need to be scalable and on a per company basis, because if they're just set at a certain number, it could really kill small businesses, and then at the same time, large businesses just decide it's worth it to eat it instead of changing. And we see that in the US with other regulatory markets.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an important point, and I had it in my notes, but I forgot to say it. So you should probably, have something like, a percentage of the gross annual revenue or something like that. And that's easily done, right? You say, okay, you rely on encryption, right? This is the amount of money you should prepare to spend on this, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the third one is I wanted to get your opinion on Dan Greer's concept of O-Day nuclear disarmament, where governments go in and they do buy a bunch of O-Days, but then release them through responsible disclosure in order to disarm them.
Yeah, I very much like that concept. I just thought that if you put it so bluntly, they're probably not going to do it.
You have to trick them.
Yeah, you need to trick them. You need to make some more complicated slides and.
Just going back to your carrot and stick, I thought I'd heard in an interview in April that there was a pledge by a number of large organizations to fund the open source community themselves, because I guess the stick is patently obvious. It's already there. That's a big enough stick for them, isn't it?
I'm not sure if it's really a stick, because the thing about O-Days is that you don't really hear, see, or feel them that much, right? They are just this threat that you don't this ominous threat. You just don't really feel it. I'm very well aware of industry's voluntary steps towards O-Day initiatives. I'm really happy about them. I think a lot more money could be poured into that thing, but you have Google's initiatives in that respect. So those are all very welcome. I absolutely agree. Like I said, those were ideas that I specifically presented to the German Parliament, and on telling them how to do their job, honestly. So we have this BSI is really a sad organization, right? And it's also the people that work there are also sad, because they know that they're just not driving it, man. And I just want to show them, this is how you could do it. And the beauty about bug bounties, of course, is if you're lucky, you don't even need to pay, right?
I guess the markets in themselves respond to profit loss by some of those companies as well, and maybe it's just an awareness in some of the organizations that actually this is a cost-effective way of funding some very important underlying parts of some of their products.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was wondering what you thought about ideas of comparing software engineering maybe more to civil engineering, where you have, a PE who needs to sign off on plans and on buildings before they can be approved, and they can hold up the entire process until they approve, and maybe having some kind of analog in software engineering where, you have somebody who has to sign off before there's a release and who has the muscle to push back against marketing and corporate to make sure that the software is good and has been audited before they'll sign off.
I have to say that I believe it's a very tempting idea. I just honestly don't see it functioning in my professional life. It's really not. I just don't see it. I honestly don't see it. We try to do it all the time, and in the end, profit is just too tempting. And you have this social dilemma again, right? Where people say, especially when you talk about, let's say, the mobile phone industry, which is where I work a lot. If everybody's affected, there's not really an incentive to be the single person that fixes this issue if you don't really know what the issue is, right? It's just this, as long as we're as good as everybody else, it's fine. And this, I think, this motivation will stay. But if you're a regulatory body, you can at least define how good everybody else is and give incentives to be better than everybody else. And I think if you do that, organizations will implement the model that you're recommending automatically by themselves. But with the incentive structure at the moment, it fails.
Just a remark before we have to close down, just an announcement. Over there in the other room will be the closing remarks for the day, and we have time for another question, and maybe we can take the further discussion to the after party tonight.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Two small things. The one thing, whenever you're talking about the BSI, remember the BSI has a budget, a yearly budget of 80 million. The NSA has 100 times that budget. So yes, there is a big disparity, and yes, we have to talk about European solutions, and we have to come up with something that holds against the NSA. And the other one is when you're talking about liability, and I think that's a very strong and a very good economic thing. But then you have to take care of the insurance companies, that they don't simply insure that liability with idiotic figures, with bad models. When the insurance companies come and say, hey, how many people are working in your security and what are you doing for security? And then we give you an idea how much that insurance will cost you. Then you have your economic scale of then security brings back money to the companies. But that means we have to work with the insurance companies a little bit so that they don't do.
Sorry, can you keep it short because the others over there are waiting and.
So for the first part, I just wanted to say that's why I want to leverage industry, and the second part, the insurance part, that's a good point. I need to think about that a bit longer before I can give you an answer. Thanks a lot, guys.